St. Augustine on predestination. Now, there are Catholic apologists such as Mr. Horn and others that will say St. Augustine believed that predestination was the idea that grace was given to the elect, and the elect, some of the elect can lose their salvation, but some of the elect are given graces if they increase their graces. And that's one interpretation from Catholic apologists. So I'll reiterate what some Catholic apologists say. They say that St. Augustine's understanding of predestination is the idea that the elect are chosen of God, but that some of the elect will make it through because God gives them grace, because God is sovereign, He gives them grace, and some don't make it. Some elect don't make it because they don't use the grace that they have, and so God doesn't increase their graces. Now, I've just read a work by St. Augustine on predestination. What's interesting is if you read that book, it came near the end of his literary career. So it's after the Dantonist controversy, the Pelagius controversy, etc. So it comes right near the end. It's one of the last second to third book at the end of his career. And we're talking many, many books that he wrote. So it's his definitive statement on the doctrine of predestination. When you read that book, what you find is he tends to home in on Romans 9, 10, and 11, and also Ephesians chapter 1, particularly verse 4, 5, and 6. He makes it absolutely clear that salvation is all of grace, that even your graces are all of grace. In other words, there is nothing that man can boast about. And he makes it absolutely clear, using Romans 9, 10, 11, and using Ephesians 1, that God chose his elect before the beginning of time. And that's it, really. So, I mean, I was reading the other day Calvin's Institutes, and you wouldn't, there's no difference between St. Augustine's understanding of predestination, generally speaking, than, say, John Calvin. There are a couple of things that he mentions in his book which we wouldn't agree with. He talks about the elect children, and he talks about baptism for children, and that they are saved because they are regenerated. So he has a Catholic understanding of baptism of children, and he connects that to predestination and election. But generally, the idea that faith is a gift of God, that our graces, that as we grow in God, it's all of God, that was St. Augustine's position. And it's not the position that Catholic apologists today propound. If you read John Calvin mainly homes in on predestination and election. He homes in on scriptures that talk about all that the Father has given me shall come, those kind of scriptures. But for St. Augustine, he homes in his book, he comes back to it time and time again in his book on predestination. He comes back to it time and time again to Romans 9, 10, and 11 and Ephesians chapter 1. And his understanding is very Pauline in terms of like salvation is all of grace. God bless you, brother from Indonesia. So I just thought I'd share that. I spent about 2 hours reading his book. It's about 120 pages long. And it's a very strong defense that God will choose whom he will, and that those whom he choose will be saved. and none will be lost. And it's a very, very strong defense of that. And his methodology is to home in on Ephesians 1 and to Romans 9, 10, 11. I thought that might be of interest to some of you out there. So be careful when you're listening to Catholic rhetoric when they're trying to argue against can you lose your salvation. The reason why they do it is that they're playing a trick. They want to debate on this topic because they want to ingratiate themselves to the wider evangelical populace. So what these Catholic apologists do is they'll quote lots of the Bible on you can lose your salvation. They'll quote lots of it. And the idea is they're trying to get people to see that Reformed theology is not biblical, and Roman Catholicism is biblical. That's really what they're trying to do. And in order to do that, they're attacking the sovereignty of God. So they're playing a trick on people in the public when they're debating on this topic. And they contradict themselves because they believe in purgatory. So if they quote a passage where they say you can lose your salvation, but that person who they say has lost the salvation goes to purgatory and they can get out of purgatory. So what do they mean by lose your salvation there? Secondly, the Vatican II, their main statement of doctrine in the 20th century states that people outside the church will find Christ, in other words, like Muslims and people like that. So it is kind of an all-inclusive guy, folks. God bless you, bro. It's a kind of all-inclusive salvation that not only those who believe in Christ, but those outside of Christ. Universalism. So the Vatican II preaches and teaches universalism. So if a Catholic apologist is saying you can lose your salvation, they're contradicting Vatican II, which says everyone's going to get saved anyway. A kind of origin perspective. So they contradict themselves on Vatican II. They contradict themselves with the issue of purgatory. Thirdly, that's another question. If the Catholics believe, if the Catholic apologists are saying you can lose your salvation, what about Ratzinger? Ratzinger has just recently been in the news that he wasn't helping these child abuse victims, that he wasn't supporting them and helping them. And 4 cases have come out recently, and there's many other cases. So does that mean, from a Catholic point of view, has Ratzinger lost his salvation? The other one is, if you believe you can lose your salvation, well, does that mean Mary could have lost her salvation? The other one is, the other issue is, I think it's Matthew 16:18, where it says, on this rock I will build my church. If the Catholics say it's about Peter, it's about Peter. Well, the passage is saying that the certain people, the church, will overcome. A certain people will overcome. It's a certainty, and the gates of hell will not prevail, saying that, the church will not lose its salvation, meaning the body of believers. If they don't take that position and they try to pretend that they don't believe that that's about Peter and the Pope, it still doesn't go well for them because it's still teaching that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. So that's another area where they're stumped. The other issue is concerning hermeneutics. You've got to take all the scripture, and they don't deal with the doctrine of the divine decrees, that God has decreed everything before it's even begun. The doctrine of predestination, the doctrine of election, the doctrine of total depravity, irresistible grace. They don't take into account all these doctrines that show you that salvation is not of man, it's of God. Even when we choose God, it's not us choosing God. God has helped us to choose him by giving us the grace to do that, as St. Augustine says. So what am I saying? I'm saying that when you're looking at church history, read the sources yourself. I've read St. Augustine on predestination. I've read the source. And in that book, he makes an interesting point, which you need to remember. He says, it's not his word, but the word that he uses is it's a kind of funny word he uses. But he basically is saying that he's edited his other works, his Romans work, his commentary on Romans and things. So his book on predestination is seminal to that understanding of that topic. So you can't go into his book of Romans and say, oh, St. Augustine believed this, because St. Augustine says, look, now my understanding of predestination has been more clarified, so now I'm going back to edit my works in accordance with my new understanding, my later understanding of the doctrine of predestination. So when Catholics start quoting St. Augustine that he believed this or he believed that on predestination, where are they quoting it from? They're not quoting it from his book on predestination. They're quoting it from earlier writings, which he has already said that he's going back to edit, or he has gone back to edit, and he's even going back to edit. So you see that whenever you're listening to Catholic apologists or any apologist, you need to make sure that the sources are good sources and correct sources and are in the chronological order, that they're quoting them contextually, in other words, in their context, and they're quoting them consistently. Just because you bring up a quotation of a scholar or a quotation of a church father doesn't mean you've won the argument. You have to give the context of that quotation. You have to give, in reference to the book, in reference to the chapter, and in reference to the whole body of work of that writer, in order to convince people that what you're saying has standing. So I finished my little delicatette, or whatever you want to call it, little talk on St. Augustine. I was quite surprised, really, reading his book. I was quite shocked, quite surprised. I thought, wow, this is like reading John Calvin. I really thought it. I thought, wow, this is like reading the Apostle Paul. St. Augustine really was really spoken to by Ephesians 1:4, and was really spoken to by Romans 9, 10, 11. It really impacted his exposition. So be careful when you're listening to Catholic apologists. They're not honest, they're not straight with their quotations, they're not straight in their interpretation of St. Augustine when it comes to predestination. Okay. So God bless you, and that this cannot be scholarly gainsaying. No, a Catholic apologist can come along and gainsay and contradict this. And the reason is because St. Augustine himself, in his book, says he's gone back to edit his other works. So if they bring up any quotations from any earlier works, it doesn't stand, because St. Augustine said, it doesn't stand, I'm editing it. And the Catholic idea of what St. Augustine is, I think not only the Catholic idea, I think it's mainly the Catholic apologist. The actual official Catholic Church doesn't really go along a lot with St. Augustine. They're more man-centered in their theology, So why Catholic apologists are jumping on the bandwagon of St. Augustine, and then talking about God's grace and God's sovereignty, it's a dishonesty. It's complete dishonesty, because you have purgatory, you have baptism. That's how they're saved, by baptism, which is a human event. Um, you know, and if you actually read Sir Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologica, I was reading someone who was criticizing Van Til, and they said Van Til didn't know, hadn't read Sir Thomas Aquinas, and so the other day I was reading Sir Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologica, and I honed in on some key chapters about reason and revelation, etc. And the criticism of Van Til is saying that Sir Thomas Aquinas was advocating human reason and human effort in our salvation, and the criticism was that Van Til's understanding there of Sir Thomas Aquinas is incorrect. That Sir Thomas Aquinas was all about grace, and it was all about what God did, not what man did. And so the argument is that Van Til was incorrect. So I went and checked it. I went and read Sir Thomas Aquinas, and it's very clear that he had a strong strain of emphasizing the human will and human reason in the exercise of faith. And it was rationalistic. So Van Til had read Sir Thomas Aquinas and had understood him perfectly. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because the Catholic Church has a man-centered idea of salvation, and you can see that in Sir Thomas Aquinas. So when Catholic apologists are using St. Augustine and using the language of God's sovereignty, which I've heard them do, they're being disingenuous, because the history of Catholic theology, you can trace it to Sir Thomas Aquinas, has this strand of human will and human effort in the issue of salvation, whereas St. Augustine was completely, in his book on predestination, he was a synergist. Before this book, he was a synergist. He had the idea that man cooperates with God. But when he writes his Doctrine of Predestination book, he's completely monergist. It's all of God. It's God that gives us the faith. It's God that gives us the strength to go on and increase our faith. It's God. And so why Catholic apologists would try to use St. Augustine in debates on you can lose your salvation, they're quoting him out of context, and they're really being disingenuous, because it contradicts Sir Thomas Aquinas and it contradicts their statements of faith, such as the Vatican II. Here ends my case. So hope that was a helpful historical reflection, and God bless you and take care. Bye now.